Cover Killer Nation, another 2011 release. This one is due to be released here in America at FYE stores and other stores that potentially would, carry this in about, well, at least for my store, about 9 hours. It'll be a little bit shorter once this is posted, but I'm going by the time it was just recorded. So basically, it was going to be released today, and that's going to be Echoes of the Fallen by the band Anterior. Now, this is the second album by this group, which has been labeled anything from metalcore to melodic death metal, which, of course, whenever you think about it, the two genres really kind of meet halfway at some locations, but at other points, there's a lot of bands that really blur those edges like this. So this is a debate that happens for a lot of different bands. Anterior just happens to be one that's also kind of within this debate, though I would say that they lean a little bit more towards the melodic death metal side, and I'll cite why here in a moment. Now, I cited the fact that this was the second album by this group for a reason, and that's because album number 2 is usually a very important album for many groups. It's one that usually can cement or reject a band's existence and their importance and really show whether or not they have matured in the correct way and are going in the correct direction, or if this is just a band that's going to sort of have a powerful debut and not really do much after that. This is a band that did have a very good debut back in 2007, and this is a band that has a lot to prove here in 2011. There are many bands that have had second albums that have been extremely successful, such as Ride the Lightning by Metallica, such as The Jester Race by In Flames. However, the most amazing of cases, the most unique of cases, of course, that is of course that of Communic, whose second album, Waves of Visual Decay, was actually better than their first, which was Conspiracy in Mind. However, Conspiracy in Mind won my Album of the Year award in 2005. Whenever 2006 and Waves of Visual Decay came around, they didn't grab the crown, simply because A, there were a lot better albums in 2006, that and the album itself had a lot of competition as opposed to the 2005's Conspiracy in Mind. So, where does Echoes in the Silence fit into all of this? Or, excuse me, Echoes of the Fallen, my fault. This is an album that shows maturity and shows growth, and that's the first good thing that I noticed from listening to this record. I believe that this is a band that has a lot of talent and a lot of potential, and they're starting to exhibit it more and more, because I did listen to their first album. I thought that it had a lot of potential, and this is a record, a sophomore album, that really shows where that potential could potentially lead. Redundancy is, of course, redundant. I'm going to continue making that joke. This album feels a lot more focused than their first, and I like the direction that it goes in, and as I said in the introduction, I believe that this band is leaning a little bit more toward the melodic death metal side in their song structure, even though in some locations and in some moments of each individual track, you're going to hear a very metalcore element to it, mainly in the vocals, the way in which the dynamics are set throughout the verses and into the chorus. But where that is really shed, where the snake sheds its skin and goes into the more mellow death territory, is whenever you hear the soloing, whenever you hear the construction process of these songs, whenever you hear the way in which they've been put together as a whole, as a body of whole. It's just something where you see mellow death in the formation of the music, in the representation of any open parts that does not include any sort of vocals or a verse, and you see with these solos, with these breakdowns, well, I hate using that word, but it really is just the proper term, you see the mellow death skin that's on the snake. Now, during the verses and the chorus, most of the time you're going to hear a very metalcore signature, and that's something that for some people may be a turnoff, but for me, even though I'm not the biggest fan of metalcore, I really dig this because I feel that this is metalcore that's done correctly. I feel sometimes that metalcore is dabbled and really buried in cliche. And the cliches were made very, very quickly in the early 2000s and were very effective whenever they were initially proposed. And it became to the point where every band that performed the style thereafter was prone to use the same cliches, or should I say the same motives and the same ideas, which prompted them to become cliche. The originals will still really strike a chord with us, considering they were the innovators, they were the people that did this style really. They were kind of like the forefathers of that idea and that genre of metalcore, whereas the newer bands, it's a little bit more difficult to get into it because it seems like it's a worn-out idea. Anterior is not using worn-out ideas. While everything does have a metalcore signature to it, within the verses and within the chorus. They are still able to really use the mellow death idea that they are able to surround their music in order to package this up nicely and make this metalcore that is extremely accessible to multiple crowds. Metalcore fans will enjoy this album because it has the elements in which they demand on the records that they listen to. However, melodic death metal fans will also clamor for this album. They will go to great lengths, or should go to great lengths, in order to acquire this album because the musicianship, the body, and the construction of these songs is very eloquently done, and done in a way that can really satisfy both and unify them. That is something that this album has that's in its favor. There's nothing really that I can tell you about this album that really is a little bit negative, aside from this one fact. As I started to bury myself later and later onto this album, I noticed that I was more aware of what was going on around me and less aware of the music. This is not something that's due to the fact that it gets repetitive, either that or it gets to the point where you want to turn it off. This is still good music. These songs are still very well constructed. It's just simply an album that takes you to this other world where you almost forget that the album is playing. It's almost like a soundtrack that's within your brain. You forget that you have the headphones on. And that's a nice little trip to be taking. So that's something that I'm not going to knock him for. However, some people may have a disparaging opinion about that. And to be honest, if you do, I understand. This is an album that I feel definitely dominates its predecessor. However, the predecessor is not that bad. This shows growth. This is a sophomore album that shows all of us, including myself, that Anterior is a band to watch here in the future. I'm going to give this album an 8 out of 10. I think it's a fair score, not to mention, I think it's a deserving score. I want to know what you guys think. What do you think about this Anterior album? Do you think that these guys have a future? Or do you think that these guys are just going to kind of loll around in the underground scene for a long time and then be forgotten about? Let me know in the comments.